All right, good morning. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 is called Human Development, or in many other books they'll call that chapter Lifespan Development. Either which way, it means the same thing. We're going to be looking at how humans change as they grow. So we look at them from infancy to early childhood development, to grade school years, to adolescence, to young adulthood, to middle-aged adulthood, and to older adulthood. And we look to see how people change as they age, how they change physically, how they change cognitively, how they change socially. We can look at any aspect of human development and look at how they change over time. In that chapter, they discuss a number of different things, but today I'm going to focus on stage theorists. And if you could really pay some extra attention to that in your book as well, that would be good. In your Chapter 9, they talk about different stage theorists. And stage theorists are people who talk about, that we go through these distinct stages in a particular order as we age. Piaget is a Swiss biologist, and he in fact was interested in cognitive development, how people change in the way they think as they go from infancy on up. You should really look at that chart when you get the chance. Another person, Erickson, was interested in how people change socially from infancy on up. And he had stages going from babyhood all the way to old age. He even had distinctly different stages for young adult, middle adult, and older adult. Freud also had stages, but his stages are presented in a different chapter, actually in the personality chapter. So we're going to save those for that time. But for today, the one stage theorist that I am going to go over with you is Kohlberg. And Kohlberg is a very famous person when it comes to moral development. There are other stage theorists also, Gilligan and others, that talk about moral development. But today I'm going to be talking about Kohlberg. And Kohlberg's stages are presented in your Chapter 9. Kohlberg had 3 levels of moral development. He called those levels pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And in the pre-conventional level, he had stage 1 and 2. In the conventional level, he had stage 3 and 4. And in the post-conventional level, he had stage 5 and 6. And so 6 stages altogether, 3 levels, but 6 stages. And I'm going to talk about those various different stages today. Kohlberg, just like many other stage theorists, thought that you could begin to go through these stages in life, but then your development might be arrested, and you might not then continue on. You may just be stuck at that stage for the rest of your life. So he was one of those people who thought you could get stuck somewhere. And so today let's talk about the different stages, and we'll talk about adults as well as children when it comes to many of those stages. Anyway, the very first stage, stage 1, is in the pre-conventional level, and certainly babies would be there. When babies are little, it's all about the self. I mean, they want gratification. They want what they want, and they want it now, and they want to avoid punishment. So if a baby reaches for the stove and you tap the baby's fingers and say, no, no, the baby decides then that reaching for the stove must be a bad thing. If the baby throws a tantrum on the floor and you pick them up in your loving arms and say, there, sweetheart, well, then the baby might decide that tantrum throwing is in fact a good thing. And so they're interested in avoiding punishment, and they like to have good things that they want, and they want them immediately. It's interesting that there are some adults who are stuck in babyhood. They've never even gone beyond babyhood when it comes to their moral development. Certainly sociopaths would fit into that category. An example of a sociopath might be a person who he's in the grocery store and he wants some cigarettes, but he doesn't have any money. And so he just goes ahead and puts them in his pocket and walks out, not thinking that that's not right to take something that doesn't belong to me. Or maybe he's on a date and the woman begins to be sexual, but then she says, well, I wasn't planning on going all the way. And he becomes incensed, enraged, and says, what do you mean no? You got me all aroused and now you're just going to stop? And he may push and push and even use aggression if necessary to get what he wants. Or perhaps he's in the tavern and someone makes him mad and he just bashes a beer bottle over their head, not thinking that that's assault and battery, and I could spend a long time in jail for that. Now, he doesn't want to be punished, but he doesn't think far ahead either. He's just pretty much reactive to every situation. All right, the next stage, when children move on into the preschool years, they begin to learn that they can't be all about the self and they can't be so immediate. And they learn that there's benefits, in fact, to being more civilized. You learn that if I share my toys with you, later then you'll share your toys with me. And if I wait for my turn in line, later when I'm first, I'll get to be first. And so they begin to learn about those things as they move into the next stage too. Then into stage 3, I picture that maybe being around 5, 6 years old as people are starting off into kindergarten. They're getting a bigger picture about roles and societal expectations and all of that. Many books call this stage, stage 3, the good boy, good girl level. And by now we're moving into what would be called the conventional level. At this level, stage 3, boys and girls are acting according to what they believe the stereotype for a girl or boy should be. So a good little girl is neat and clean and polite and helpful and wears a smile. A good little boy is athletic and rough and tumble and takes risk and isn't a crybaby and so on. And as much as they're able to meet that stereotype, they feel good about themselves. If they're unable, then they don't feel so good about themselves. Let's say you're a very athletic little girl and you'd rather climb the jungle gym than play with dolls. You know, you may feel like you don't fit in. Or you're a boy and you're very studious and you don't prefer athletic things. So he said that children at their age judge themselves according to the good boy, good girl standard. And he said many adults judge themselves by that standard as well, particularly women. He thought women particularly did that. You know, they have this role idea about what it means to be a good wife and a good mother. And many women have that martyr mom idea. You know, I'll do everything for my family and expect nothing in return. By the way, which is exactly what you're going to get. If all you do is give and drop of the hat, you're anyone's doormat, you know, that's what you're going to get, is not much in return. But anyway, Kohlberg said that, you know, it's not good to operate that way. You know, we have needs too. You know, we can't just judge ourselves by societal standards. Men also, of course, have their roles too, their expectations. You can't just be a provider. You got to be a good provider. And if they're not, they may feel bad about themselves. And you have to be able to protect your family. But yet you can't protect your family at all times. So men might also judge themselves by societal role standards. The next stage then is stage 4. And stage 4 also is in the conventional level, and Kohlberg said that's where he finds more men to be. And by the way, I happen to know from going through life that I see people constantly in this stage. Constantly. It just screams at me, stage 4, stage 4. At this stage, it's all about law and order and obeying authority figures. And so you figure if it was grade school, maybe we're on into 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. But by that age, certainly they have learned about rules. And they know how to follow rules in the classroom and at home. But if you ask a child that age, why should I do that particular thing? They'll just say, because it's a rule. They don't think about it beyond that. It's as though the rules are just carved in stone out there above and beyond human intervention. And also at that age, they believe that authority figures are always right. If the teacher tells you to do it, it must be right. If the parents or the physician tells you to do it, then it must be right. But as I said, I meet many adults right there at that stage as well. Every day they just blindly obey all the rules without ever thinking about, are these rules right? Should they be changed in some way? They just obey, as though the rules are carved in stone. When I taught out in San Diego, I had the opportunity to teach at a number of different places. I taught in an Indian reservation for a while. That was a marvelous experience. I also taught at Miramar Naval Air Base, and I was teaching exactly the same stuff I'm teaching you today. And anyway, I remember there when I was teaching the officers and enlisted people that were there, I was teaching them about Kohlberg, and I said that to follow the rules blindly without thinking about it, Kohlberg says that's immature. But hands went up all over the room, and they said, if I tell my people to do a particular thing, I don't want them to all sit down and say, wait a minute, I got to think about that. He said, they said, that attitude will get us killed. And I said, you know, even in the armed services, there's such a thing as moral courage. You really have to think about your behavior. And today, I'm sure, because that was many years ago, today I'm sure they probably actually teach that in the services is that you have to use your mind and think about your behavior and all of that. Because sometimes in the service, you know, you may have an officer that will tell you to do something that's improper, you know. And let's say, for example, you're running a prison camp, you know, of our POWs, you know, that we've collected, and maybe your officer tells you to do something like torture a prisoner. Well, you know, you're going to have to say, I'm sorry, I just can't do that. My conscience won't allow me to do that. But then you have to peacefully accept the consequences, which will be, you know, getting court-martialed and having to explain yourself in front of the judge, sort of thing. All right, so then the next stage, and Kohlberg said few people ever get beyond stage 4, period. They just don't. Stage 5, though, moves on into the post-conventional level. And at that stage, you begin to realize that rules aren't carved in stone, that people make rules, and if the rules are no longer appropriate, we can get together as a society and change the rules. And if you don't believe that's true, just look around at the different states and some of the laws that have been on the books. I heard San Francisco used to have a law on their books that said a man is not allowed to wear a ponytail. And in fact, that law came about because when Chinese immigrants were coming over many years ago to work on the railroad, a lot of them had very long hair, and so they would pull it back into a tie. Well, people here in this country just didn't understand that ponytail thing, and so they said, I don't think that looks right, I'm going to pass a law about it, and they did. So clearly some rules need to be reconsidered and changed. The final level then is stage 6. And stage 6, I should say stage instead of level, stage 6 is the personal conscience level. And at that stage 2, you do follow the rules, because after all, we all understand the rules didn't just come about in a vacuum. They're there because we need them. Even culinary rules, you can say to yourself, I'm going to eat that pork chop raw. Well, go ahead, but you know, rules are here for a reason. We don't want chaos, we don't want anarchy, we don't want someone bigger than you breaking in your house and taking your stuff. And so, of course, we follow the rules. But we don't do so blindly. We go through the day awake, and we think about our decisions. Awake, like the Buddhists would say, right? Awake, we think about our decisions. And so most of the time we follow the rules, but once in a while we'll see a rule that we just can't follow because it's against our conscience. And then it's our obligation to stand up against it and peacefully accept the consequences. And that, in fact, is the definition of civil disobedience, to stand up against an unjust rule and peacefully accept the consequences. And then as more and more people begin to stand up against that rule, society is forced to take a new look and change that unjust law. All right, that's all for this chapter. Enjoy reading it, and be sure to read the study guide so you see the extra words that you'll need for your test.